Hi. I think I'm doing something. I've approached this a little bit differently. I'm in my final year, like almost in my final 6 months of my PhD in fine art practice in Northumbria, and I wanted to show you, rather than trying to do like a kind of speed dating CV kind of thing, which I'm really bad at. I kind of lack the charisma. So I'm going to show you like a bit of something. Probably quite a vulnerable thing of like a thing I'm kind of going back and looking at old work and kind of taking it apart for my thesis. So I'm showing you something that I'm kind of working on, that I'm kind of taking apart, and it's a bit like an idea, a bit of a speculation, rather than a complete thing. So what my kind of aim is to use this kind of artwork that I made for a gallery in London a couple of years ago, which is kind of dotted around behind all the quotes, which is called TFW, The Formless Wastes. It was for a gallery called Res in Deptford in 2017, and it was a way of like working out things through my practice as part of my PhD. And I want to use this to kind of propose the idea of making as like kind of an incomplete gesture or diagram. So making not as towards production, but as a thing that does something else. As a way of kind of producing affect, so that making has this kind of other capacity other than the result. And as a kind of speculative practice and a kind of research, which shouldn't be controversial because, you know, we do have art-based, practice-based PhDs. So TFW at its core was the reading of a science fiction horror story. And it was a horror story that's more like kind of piece of fan fiction. It was kind of borrowed from a tiny piece of fragmentary text in a horror computer game called Resident Evil. And this is kind of unimportant, you don't have to read it, but I thought it was like a really powerful narrative device. And I used this kind of piece of text and then kind of gave myself kind of formal constraint to kind of adapt the text, keep all of its words where they were. It was written in a series of diary entries. Keep the words as they were, keep the breaks where they were, but like I could add as many words as I wanted and expand the thing with the idea of changing its context, proposing this kind of ethical and subjective twist, which is kind of part of the larger project of my PhD. So overall, though, I'm kind of interested in art practice that's kind of multilinear, as in that that has like multiple pathways through it, that it doesn't claim kind of authority or has a different attitude to authority, or it's critical of ideas of authority. So, in kind of drawing from people like Elena Sixu or Kathy Acker. That they can kind of create an environment that produces desire in an audience to engage with something uncertain, non-linear, non-authoritative, flexible and multiple, to create that kind of situation where you can deal with something non-authoritative. And it hinges on the speculation and collaboration from the audience to engage with this work that's always incomplete, to like deal with something that's a bit of a mess, which is my entire persona. So TFW used making a number of ways. It had produced like literally new pathways for the work to develop along. It's partially improvised. It was about producing different kinds of affective states, both in myself and in my audience. And it's a way of framing the work as a process that's always ongoing, always incomplete, and always fractured. And there's a literal participation, like there is a little bit of audience participation now. So at its core, it's reading out this kind of diary entry-based fan fiction. But the idea is that how I do it is that the reading is broken up with all of these bits that are these kind of open-ended kind of things, these acts of making. And all these acts of making have their kind of origins in either kind of divination practices or in role-playing game mechanics, which are actually, I think, are both kind of the same thing, and also the same thing as kind of the kind of interrogation of materials I learned when I was like trained to be a sculptor in a master's degree. Like I think they have the same kind of attitude. So the reading starts. Start reading the story, and then there's like breaks in it. So there's like an early point when I kind of cast some rope that was like a bit like kind of diagram to show the space, like where we were going to have the story. But it's a bit like haruspicy, the thing where you kind of read livers. The kind of shape was going to be a thing that like, hey, maybe actually there's a bit of a lump here. Maybe that will be incorporated. There's a projection. running at the back. I had a beautiful gift, but it fell apart. So there's a projection at the back, which I filmed in Whitley Bay, which is of a seal. He occasionally comes past one way up, and comes back the other way around. And I use that as a kind of like ongoing coin toss. So if I ever need to make a decision on the fly, I could be like, well, if the seal's one way up, then it's yes. If the other way, it's no. It's got a diagram. I used things called roll tables, which you play role-playing games you might be familiar with, which is basically you roll the dice and you consult a long table and it kind of makes the decision for you. I have a really crude kind of tarot deck that I do with some readings. How long am I doing for time? I didn't take a note. 1 minute. Okay. Blah, blah, blah. The point is, these things are kind of breaks that they point to something else. There is a kind of joke in the performance, mainly for me, that these things don't actually influence the story. They're presented as like we're going to generate a character that's going to be added into the story, or they're going to change the context of the next section, but they don't. The point is they're about kind of like changing the sense of anticipation. I've kind of called it like a kind of false kind of Chekhov's gun, in that you think a thing might be going to happen, but it doesn't, and it's about creating a context, and you accept that things are a bit kind of ramshackle and they aren't going to go together, which is perfectly fitting with me saying I finished now with like 2 points left. Okay, thank you very much.